I'm building a floating deck in my backyard today. Before I do all of that, I want to prep the area. So I've already uprooted the weeds, grabbed a rake and leveled out the soil, laid down some landscaping fabric, and up next I'm going to lay down some gravel. While it is a relatively simple job, it's much easier to do with a friend. So I'm going to call a couple of buddies and we're going to get started. If you're using gravel under your deck, make sure it's compactable. I recommend using crushed rock. For my project, I'm using decomposed granite. Now it's time to spread it all out. You can use a rake or a hoe, but I like to get dirty and just spread it around with my hands. Once it's spread out real nice, it's time to bring in the concrete blocks that the deck is going to sit on. Place 4 corner blocks so they are 12 feet apart along the long sides of the rectangle and 10 feet apart along the short sides. Make sure to measure from the centers of the block. Then, using the remaining blocks, make rows of 3 blocks each, keeping them all evenly spaced from the center of each block. Final step is to make sure it's all level by using your carpenter's level. Now we're ready to get building. I've cut all my wood to size using a circular saw. Be super careful when using power tools and always wear all the proper safety equipment. Lay the boards to make a rectangle. Fasten the pieces together with 3 3.5-inch deck screws at each corner. These deck screws with the star drive go in really nicely, but you can also use standard deck screws. Now that the outer frame is built, we're going to mark spots for the joists along the 12-foot boards. Place a standard joist so it's centered on each pair of lines, and make sure the tops of the joists are flush. Then, fasten them together with 3 3.5-inch screws. Repeat this step for the other joists. Now that your frame is built, you want to square it up. The easiest way to do this is to measure from corner to corner using your tape measure with the goal of creating a symmetrical X. If the measurements from these 2 corners is exactly the same as from these 2 corners, then your frame is square. If they're slightly off, push diagonally from the opposite corners with the longer measurement until it's just right, and the frame makes contact evenly. Once you set your frame on top of the blocks, it's a good idea to grab your leveler and make sure everything's level. Check this out. Earlier, when we were pre-leveling, everything looked great. Now that the frame is on the blocks, we still have a little more evening out to do. No big deal. What we can do now is make adjustments to the gravel underneath the blocks, or possibly even add more blocks to make sure this is level before we finish off the job. Once everything is squared and level, it's time to install the deck boards. Before you install each deck board, inspect each side to make sure the side you like is facing up. A nice decorative tip when you install the first board is to install it with a 1-inch lip, like this one. Start on one end of the deck and work your way back. Lay the board next to the previous ones. You want to space them at least 1/8 of an inch apart. A neat trick is to take your screws, put them in between each board to help measure the spacing. Using your 2-inch deck screws, fasten the boards to the joists, working your way down. Rule of thumb, you want to make sure your screws are twice as long as the width of the board. Fasten 2 screws into each board at each joist. Most of the time, you don't need a permit to build a floating deck. Now that being said, it's not a bad idea to check the local laws and codes in your area. Also, it's a good idea to finish your deck with a protective deck seal to prevent it from splintering and weathering. If you'll excuse me, I do have a brand new deck I need to enjoy.